Okay, welcome everybody this evening, the 21st of April, and here we are with your legislators from the 21st District. This is a live virtual town hall with State Representatives Lillian Ortiz Self and Strom Peterson and Senator Marco Elias. The 21st District covers parts of Snohomish County, including Mukilteo and parts of Linwood, Edmonds, and Everett. My name is Lily, and I will be your host tonight. Thanks for taking the time to join us. We sent out a link for you to submit questions in advance, so we'll start with those in a minute. But if you have a question, please type it in the comments section of whatever platform you are watching on. Without further ado, let's go to opening remarks with Senator Marco Elias.
Thank you so much, Lilia, and thank you everyone for joining us. It's the 21st delegation on the 21st of April. How appropriate. It's a delight to be here with my dear friends and our representatives, Strom Peterson and Lillian Ortiz Self. This was, despite being a short session, it was a momentous one, building on the progress we made in our 2021 session and continuing to focus on the issues that I'm hearing about from folks in our community. This year, I was pleased to take up a new role as chair of the Senate Transportation Committee, and we passed the greenest, boldest transportation package in our state's history to ensure that more people can access more options to move around our communities. And we know that as the pandemic's ending and people are starting to go back to work in person, traffic's starting to get pretty bad again. And it's time to make sure that we get light rail that we were promised, that we get more transit options, and that we address some of those corridors where we need to do more work, like Interstate 405, where we're going to fix and add capacity and add bus rapid transit to make sure there's more choices for people moving on that corridor. But there's a lot more in the package, exciting investments in Mukilteo, in Edmonds, and Linwood to help make sure that here at home, we're replacing aging bridges, that we're building sidewalks and pedestrian and bike facilities, and that we're making sure that kids have a safe route to school. But that wasn't the only thing I worked on. I also have heard from folks, particularly seniors, who are really struggling with fixed incomes in our community. And I was proud to pass a bill for those who are receiving in-home services through our Medicaid program to raise what's called the personal needs allowance. For some of our seniors, the government says once you make a certain amount, above a certain amount, you got to give all the rest of your income to the government to pay for your Medicaid services. And we raised that personal needs allowance to make sure that seniors have more dollars in their pockets to afford food and rent, to make sure that we have our basic needs met, the cost of prescriptions. And we also took action on the cost of insulin this year to make sure that we cap the price of insulin so that no one who is struggling with diabetes has to choose between life-saving medication and other necessities. These are the things I'm hearing about from folks out there. We need help with prescriptions. We need help with the rising cost of living. We need help with traffic and congestion. These are the things we're focused on: solving problems for regular people in our district, solving problems for the folks that write into us. I'm glad we made some progress. Tonight's an opportunity to hear about where we need to do more and better. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to my dear friend and my favorite state representative, Lillian Ortiz Self.
Thank you, Senator Elias. Thank you, everybody, for attending. It's our pleasure to be here with you today. And Senator Elias said it well. This was a momentous session. Before I go into some of the highlights, I just want to state what my committees are. I am chair of our caucus. This is my second year. I've had the privilege to lead a wonderful group of dedicated members who work so hard in the House for all of you and for the state of Washington. I am also on the Education Committee. I am on the Human Services and Early Learning Committee, and I'm also on Rules and Labor. And so I get a chance to really focus in on living wage jobs, focus in on across the board, across sectors, which is very exciting to me. This year, more than ever, we've never had a short session like this. Part of that is because we had a lot of federal dollar matches that came down that we were able to utilize, and we were able to focus them in the areas that we've heard the most from our constituents on: education, mental health, housing, public health. Our transportation package, like Senator Leah said, was wonderful. It's going to bring so many jobs to the Snohomish County area and across the state of Washington that we're very proud of. Couple highlights. We were able to pass in education a bill that we've been working on for a very long time on bringing in more counselors, nurses, or psychologists to our schools. We opened it up and made it flexible for social emotional learning issues, and schools will get to choose which area they need the most help with. Do they need an extra counselor? Do they need a nurse? Do they need a psychologist or a social worker? And bring that into their schools. And so we funded that, and which is a big step towards a place where we want to keep going, and that is to support our teachers, support our students. So that was exciting. We were able to get a COLA in for our retirees that haven't had one, and way overdue. And we were able to get a COLA that we've been fighting for a while, and we know there's more work to do there still, but we were very excited to be able to do that. And then, like I said, we were able to work across mental health issues. We were able to get money in for our childcare and our workforce of our in human services that has been so underfunded. Our behavioral health workers, we were able to help stabilize because we know that we're losing more and more. Public health, housing, mental health, all those issues. We're excited to answer any questions on any of those. But I just have to say again, very proud of the work that we did, because we were really able to get more done in a short session than I think we've done in a long session in a long time. Everyone really just put their nose to the grindstone and worked so hard because the need was great. So thank you very much for your support. And now I get to introduce my favorite state representative, Representative Strom Peterson.
Thank you, Lillian, Representative Ortiz-Self. And certainly one of the reasons we got so much done is that we had Representative Ortiz-Self herding the Democratic caucus, herding HERD, not hurting, making sure that we were showing up on time, getting the work done, and being able to do so much in that 60-day session. But I do want to start out maybe on a little bit more of a somber note. As we know, here in the 21st, throughout Snohomish County and throughout Washington, we have a lot of Ukrainian families with loved ones back in Ukraine that are suffering, that are scared, that are frightened. And I just want to acknowledge that. Some dear friends of ours, of course, are in constant contact, and just want to show our support however we can to the people of Ukraine, the brave and the incredible work that the president is doing, and the everyday people of Ukraine. So just want to make that statement before we get into some of our local politics, because everything is connected. And we know, again, so many of our friends and neighbors have loved ones directly in Ukraine. So a little thought for them, for everybody tonight. Again, thank you everybody for being here. I'm super proud of the work that we did this past session and the session before. As you all might know, we work in a biennial system, so we kind of do it in 2-year chunks. So if we consider this short session and last year's longer session, which is only 105 days, so that's still pretty short with the amount of work that we do, we did pass some incredible legislation and put some really focused spending on issues that matter most to the people of the 21st District and the state of Washington. I'm really fortunate. I have been able to chair for the last 2 years the Housing, Human Services, and Veterans Committee. So we've been dealing with some of the issues that fills up my email box the most, and that's issues around homelessness. That's issues around people trying to afford their rent. Issues around people accessing the very basic human services that they need. We also did some incredible work with the developmentally disabled community this year, really changing the way that we do business with so many families and so many people in our communities that have a loved one or are that person that has a developmental disability. And we're really changing the way that we get services to those families. And I'm super proud of the work that my vice chair did on that in that realm. And I also serve on the Civil Rights and Judiciary Committee. Again, super proud of the work we did on a number of things, especially around addressing gun violence. And I know we'll get into that later. Thank you, Senator Leas. I will give you a lot of thanks as we get through some of these questions on the incredible work that you did. And of course, my seatmate for her steadfast leadership for years on addressing gun violence. And then I also serve on the capital budget, and just again, incredibly proud of the dollars that we put into capital budget funding for things like housing, making sure that we can free up our local governments to do rapid acquisition of housing. So if there's a hotel or a motel that they can buy, and they can convert that into immediate housing for those of our friends and neighbors that are suffering and living on the streets, purchasing apartment buildings. So instead of having to wait for a number of years while you find the land, get the permits, design the building, build the building, we can get people housed sometimes within less than 100 days. So getting people off the streets into the housing that they need and finding them the supports. So we were able to do a lot of that in this year's capital budget, following on to last year's capital budget as well. So again, some great successes. Hey, and I will talk, I'm sure, later about a couple of misses that maybe we had as well, and things that we'll still be working on this interim. And we want to hear from you about new ideas that we can bring back next year. We know this interim will go by quickly. We'll be back at it for real in Olympia, we think, in January. But we know that the work is starting right now already, talking to staff and working on bills. So get those questions for us tonight, and get that information to us and ideas to us soon. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, and welcome again, everybody. So we're going to start with some of the questions that we received over the survey. But if you have a burning question, please be sure to type it in your comments section. And let's start with the first one. It's from Stu, and he asks, if we advocate for the importance of quality childcare, why doesn't Washington require pre-service education before employment?
I can answer some of that, because we have talked about that in our early learning committee. Part of the issue is that we hardly pay our childcare staff. That's our biggest issue. We know that our childcare staff should be paid way more than they're paying. They barely make a living wage. Oftentimes they do not, and they have to ask for assistance. And that is horrific. So first of all, our bigger issue is coming up with the funding to be able to pay an adequate salary for our staff. The second issue is until we do that, requiring more pre-service, it becomes a big barrier. And the third one is we have a shortage of childcare workers. And so putting in more requirements only makes another barrier and another crisis for us in our childcare facilities. And so it's a much more comprehensive issue than just saying, yes, we would like, when we offered training and requiring steps for them to continue on with their continuing ed, there was a lot of concern that there was going to be that was going to be a big barrier. And we've been trying to work through that and fund it and bring money and bring the trainings to the centers, because people can't afford the days off. So we are trying to kind of look at it in a comprehensive way. Ideally, yes, we would, ideally, I would love to have every childcare worker have a bachelor's degree in early childhood education. But until the state is willing to fund it and really promote it in that way, and not just the state, the country, it becomes a big barrier for us. And right now we're working with the shortage that currently exists.
All right. Our next question is from Peter. What actions are you prepared to take for the state to fund SEBB insurance for substitute educators and other non-staffed educational workers?
I can answer that if you want, Peter. You are on my list to call because this is an issue that was brought up to me this last session, and it came in late, and we tried to look at it, and there were quite a few hurdles to jump over, and the time just did not allow us to get anything done through that. So I would love to personally, because and I'm saying me because I sit on the education committee. My colleagues, I'm sure, are interested as well. But I would more than would love to convene a group of stakeholders together so that we could sit down and really look at what are the barriers, why can't this happen, what needs to happen in order for us to implement this. I have talked to our committee chair, and she's very interested in hearing what those barriers are and how she can support us as well. So please, let's keep talking about this, because I would love to, in the interim, be able to do some of that work.
Okay, our next question is from Matthew.
Oh, and Lily, if I could just say, Peter asked that question. Peter, please call my office and set something up so that we can make sure that we follow up on that and bring the and have a conversation around the people that need to be at the table. Thank you. Sorry, Lilia.
Okay, Matthew's question is it's pretty ample, so you might have to take turns on this one. Matthew says, do you have any updates on homelessness, mental health, drug use, increased violence prices? So yeah, there you go.
Well, and thanks, Matthew. And really lots of updates. And as Lily just said, this is a question that has a lot of answers, because we did a lot of work on these very issues over the last couple of years. Again, chairing the Housing, Human Services, and Veterans Committee, one of our key focuses over the last 2 years, that this committee, just to clarify, this committee has been formed in this capacity for the last 2 years. We've been working on issues around homelessness for a lot longer than that, but we formed this committee to really have a much more direct focus on the issue around homelessness and housing instability. And we have done a lot of work on that. We've really put in a number of not only budgetary efforts, but policy efforts into making sure that we're better partners with our local governments, to make sure that we are, for example, that we're funding the people that work on the front lines of homelessness, those advocates and those outreach professionals that are working in permanent supportive housing or working on the streets trying to address this issue, kind of like the previous question, that we're going to pay them a living wage and make sure that they're getting the support that they need. And this goes again for our mental health professionals, and trying to get more mental health professionals educated here in Washington. We have an extreme shortage of professionals to do this work. And so 2 years ago, with the help of Leader Chop, we have just broken ground on a mental health teaching hospital that's connected to UW, and it's just south of the 21st. It's not too far away. It's going to take a while to get those people into the pipeline and get that university built, but it is going to be a world-class university specifically around mental health, because we know that problem's not going away. We have, as a country, probably 40 or 50 years of underfunding mental health programs and underfunding mental health services, and we're paying the price. And so it's going to take us a while to dig out of this hole, but we have been incredibly focused on that. And of course, that goes right hand in hand with the opioid epidemic and the methamphetamine epidemic, which never went away. We remember hearing about methamphetamine throughout the 90s and early 2000s, and then opioids showed up. Well, meth never went away either. So we kind of have a dual epidemic happening. And I always want to give an incredible shout out to our Snohomish County Public Health Agency, because they have done some nationally leading work on addressing that, whether it's through drug take back, whether it's through needle exchange programs, whether it's through just general outreach to get the word out. So lots of work to do, Matthew. That's an incredible question. And I probably will spend the rest of my legislative career, however long that might be, working on these very issues. So thanks for that.
Okay, next we have Jerome. How is the transportation package going to affect our district, and what can we do about high gas prices?
Well, that's a great question, Jerome. It is the biggest thing the transportation package is going to do is give people in South Snohomish County more choices for how we move around. I think about my friend who's a traveling salesperson and who needs to use her car to move around. We're going to make sure that there's better options on 405 and on I-5 to address congestion. I think about young students I teach at community college who have difficult time accessing educational opportunities. We're going to make transit and our ferries and our rail fares free for people under the 18 and under, to make sure that more people can access education and opportunity, get connected to the community. We've heard a lot from constituents who want to bike to work but can't get there safely because there isn't good infrastructure. We're going to do more to invest in that. So across the board, the message of Move Ahead Washington is to create more choices, more opportunities for people to consider different ways to move around. Also tied into that is a realization that our transportation sector is part of the problem when it comes to climate change. Because of our dependence on gasoline-powered vehicles, we're putting too much pollution into the air. So we invest a lot to help move towards an electric vehicle future for our state, investing in more charging infrastructure, investing in incentives to get people to move to electric vehicles. That's going to help with high gas prices. We've got some of the cleanest energy in the country that's affordable. So if you can charge your electric car at home, you can avoid paying the prices at the pump. We also have invested and have a new clean fuels program, which will make sure that we're creating our own homegrown biofuels here in Washington state so that we're not dependent on Vladimir Putin and Saudi dictators to get our oil, that we can grow our own fuels here and reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. That's not going to deal with sort of the crisis at the pump right now. Unfortunately, in state government, we don't have control over the price of fuel in the marketplace. We've seen the war in Ukraine has skyrocketed the cost of oil and gas. We know that as we move away from importing Russian oil and gas, that's going to have an impact on prices here too. So I think in the short term, we're trying to create alternatives so folks can avoid driving if they want to avoid those costs. And in the long term, investing in more options like electric vehicles and biofuels to help us address that. But in the meantime, Vladimir Putin and his price hikes are going to have a real impact on families. And that's why cutting the cost of insulin, addressing that personal needs allowance for seniors, where we can control costs to help families that are struggling, we'll do everything we can.
And I'd also like to add that again, and this is my labor committee membership talking, but every time we invest in an infrastructure package or we bring in new projects into our area, we bring in more jobs. And that is critical because these are living wage jobs. And so we always see that impact across the state of Washington, and we'll see that impact in Snohomish County as well.
Okay. Next up, we have Mallory. Let's see. Given the incredible housing challenges our state faces, are you committed to passing a zoning reform bill that will ease restrictions on diverse housing options that are currently illegal in nearly 3/4 of every city in Washington?
Great. And yeah, thanks for that question, Mallory. I was a co-sponsor of that piece of legislation from Representative Bateman down in Olympia. And this is probably one of the best examples of what can't be done in a short session. I know that, the effort was there. The lieutenant governor testified in front of my committee. We didn't have this bill in front of my committee. It was a local government committee issue, but the lieutenant governor put a lot of work and effort and studies and into this issue to see where we can find that missing middle housing, because we understand the pressures that does, the downward pressure that it has on people that are struggling to find housing in the first place. The fewer houses that are available, the harder it is for people to find something that's affordable. And that's what's causing the huge increase in not only home prices, but the huge increase in rents as well. So I'm committed to continue to work on this and find those opportunities. There is a lot of bipartisan support around this issue, but to try to find all those, but there are a lot of hurdles to come through, and there are a lot of nuance in this policy. So I am committed. I actually have a plan this summer to meet with both Democratic and Republican members of my committee, members that are really interested in this kind of policy. So I'm going to travel around the state and talk to a number of people so we can get a lot of this work done before the session starts, and then we'll still have some details to hammer out. But it's incredibly important to really address this housing crisis, find more opportunities for young families to buy a housing opportunity in Edmonds, whether that might be a duplex or a triplex. We need to make sure that we're opening up our areas around Highway 99 and some of our along transit to make sure that we have better opportunities for multifamily housing, making sure that we're supporting, as Marco said, with the transportation package, the infrastructure for our single family neighborhoods. And that's better sidewalks, and that's better bus service and better transit service. So there's a lot going on, but I do support taking a serious look at zoning changes throughout the state, allowing cities more flexibility, and making sure that they're addressing the needs. We've done some work in the last couple of years. I passed a bill last session dealing with this, but it's not enough. It was just kind of a start. And we need to make sure that we're giving funding to the cities so they can do this planning. And that was in the budget this year, to make sure that our local governments can hire the right professionals, can make sure that they're getting this planning done so they can make the right decisions locally. But basically, we need more housing. And this is not just true in Washington. This is true across the country. There's a housing crisis of millions of homes across the country.
All right. Next, we have Jana with a question about education. What can you do to ensure that students who need to access education remotely can continue to do that and receive live instruction from certified teachers?
Jana, we have been talking across the board through the different school districts, and what we're hearing is that quite a few of the school districts have some type of remote opportunity. Now, will it be to the extent that it was during the pandemic? I don't think so. But they are trying to see if they can keep some type of remote options open. I think the bigger issue is we are facing a shortage of teachers. And so to have a live, in order to have live instruction from a certified teacher, we have to make sure we have the amount of students, and are we filling our classrooms that need to be filled? Those are the kinds of questions the school districts are bringing to us. And so we know that during the interim, I'm personally working on bringing stakeholders together and looking at how do we continue to recruit and retain certified teachers so that these kinds of things become more viable options for us.
Okay, we are almost at the halfway point. If you have a question, please make sure you type it into the comments of wherever platform you're watching from. Next up is Stephen. I am hopeful that you can help improve and increase the size of the healthcare workforce in the coming years. We've seen many people leaving healthcare professions in the last couple of years, and it'll have an impact on public health for years to come.
I am hopeful of that as well, Stephen. We have invested a lot more money than we have because it was very underfunded, our whole public health sector. We have seen during this pandemic that the crucial role that it plays, and we also unfortunately saw how underfunded it was as well. So we've made some significant investments in public health, as well as looking at our healthcare workforce and trying to make sure that they have some of the protections that they need. We saw several bills come through. One of them didn't make it all the way through, but we have been looking at how do we make sure that we protect especially our nursing workforce and those front line and everybody in the front line. What does that mean? That make sure that they have the proper equipment that they need. What does it mean for them to have the proper rest breaks? What do we need to do to invest to hire more? And we know that there is a nursing shortage across the nation. I believe in the state of Washington, they're saying, it's in the thousands that we could be recruiting. So we did things like unconditional loan forgiveness programs for our nursing staff. Those are some of the things that we're looking at and we're putting in place because we know the impact. It's exactly what you said, Stephen. The impact on public health took a big hit, and we lost a lot of great workers due to the stress and the conditions they had to work under. And we have to keep looking at that and trying to remediate it.
We're also in the higher ed space looking at how do we create new and different opportunities for people to get into healthcare professions. For a lot of folks, taking time off and going to get a college degree is just a barrier that they can't deal with. They're a working mom who's got to put food on the table and can't take time off to go to school. So we're looking at models like apprenticeship pathways and other ways to work while you learn, so that we can get more folks into the profession. I think for a long time we believed, as a society, that college was kind of the one size fits all answer for everybody. And what we can see now is that college isn't necessarily the right pathway for everybody, but more training and more education are critical in this economy. So we're also looking at things like to get more nursing students, we need more nursing educators. And our nursing educator salaries were so low a couple years ago that you could make way more being a nurse than being a nurse educator. And so we've raised those nurse educator salaries so that we can recruit the folks that can teach that next generation of nurses. So I think looking at the education and workforce pipeline is also a really critical part of this. It's also a way to get more diverse folks into the profession. And we know that when people receive healthcare from folks who look like them and who speak the language that they speak, we get better care for people. So we need to make sure we're attracting a diverse workforce as well. And our community colleges, our technical colleges are a really great opportunity to get a more diverse workforce trained quickly through some of the apprenticeships and other pathways they're creating. But this is an issue that it took us, like so many others, years to get into. It's going to take us some time to dig our way out.
Okay, our next question is from Kent. Representative Peterson, your primary focus of the last legislative session was trying to drive housing providers out of the state, like my wife and I who care about our tenants. Thankfully, your proposed legislation failed. What are the majority of housing providers doing so badly that will require your newly proposed legislation next session?
Well, Kent, I appreciate the question, and do want to point out that I have worked very closely with the housing providers, with the landlord lobby in all of the legislation. We meet consistently, and I'm always open to conversations and new ideas. We've done actually some incredible work over the last couple of years in supporting the landlords, especially in a lot of the funding that we do for the Landlord Mitigation Fund, and making sure not only that we have federal dollars that went into that to help landlords that had renters that couldn't afford to pay their rent, and to make sure that they were made whole, but also that this would be an ongoing program, that we were going to continue to fund this landlord mitigation program. So when we get through a pandemic, but we still know that there are going to be people, there are going to be families that are struggling to pay their rent because maybe they got sick and they lost their job. All of the reasons that people struggle to make ends meet. We will continue with that landlord mitigation program, and that has been hugely successful. Landlords have really accessed that program, and this is tens and tens of millions of dollars to help make sure that landlords are whole. I also want to just point out that this is certainly not a Washington issue. I've mentioned raising rents, the higher rents that have been happening over the last few years, especially. This is nationwide. There was just an article in the Washington Post this morning talking about we set another record in 21 for the increase of rents nationwide. We're already breaking that record going into the first part of 2022. So I'm trying to work with landlords to see how we can help support their needs and the costs that they have. They have real costs when it comes to keeping their homes and apartments, up to date and safe and great places to live. So thank you for being a caring landlord. And I think 99% of the landlords out there do care about their tenants and do have good relationships with their tenants. And I don't think any of the legislation that we've passed has to really counter that relationship that's already there. One of the bills that I worked on that didn't pass, and maybe this is the one that you're happy didn't pass, was just to have landlords give a 6-month notice to tenants if they were going to increase the rent significantly. And that number changed as we were working on the legislation. And I was working again with landlords and my friends across the aisle to find a number that made sense. That bill didn't work, but I thought that was fair policy, that if a landlord was going to raise the rent and they knew that they were going to raise the rent, that they could give that family a few months notice to make sure that family could make the decisions that they needed to make. Maybe they could get a few more hours at work. Maybe they would have to move. And in this rental market, it's really hard to find a new place to live. We have about 95+% rental market is full. So I think that a lot of landlords are doing well, and I have quite a bit of a number of stories from across the state, a lot of companies that are moving in and buying up properties here in Washington, both single family homes and larger multifamily homes. So I think there are people coming into Washington state buying properties. I would rather have that homegrown. So Kent, I'm hoping that we can work together to keep you as a positive influence with landlords, helping protect and care for your tenants. So I hope that we can continue this conversation.
Oh, gosh, my mouse got lost there for a minute. Okay, next up is Stephanie. What are you doing to make sure our police and law enforcement can do their jobs?
Well, I will just say, first off, the last month's been really rough here in Washington state with some really sad, tragic losses of officers. We lost a brave officer in Everett who was doing what law enforcement does, keeping a community safe from someone who was very dangerous and very violent, and he was killed in the line of duty. And I know our hearts go out to him. We lost an Edmonds officer who was off duty in Las Vegas. A reminder that our officers are never off duty. They're always working to make sure wherever they are is safe. And then, of course, the tragic loss of an officer in Pierce County. So it's a good reminder to all of us that our state troopers, our police officers are, when the rest of us are running away, they're running into danger to keep us safe. And our legislature is focused on empowering our police to do what they're best at, which is to keep us safe from the folks who really are out there trying to cause harm. So we've, in the last couple of years, passed legislation to provide better training and support. We've invested in community policing solutions so that there's more resources for police officers to get to know the communities that they're serving. We're working on improving diversity in our police force. Just like we said in the last question, if people see folks like them in uniform, it builds trust between communities. If our officers can speak multiple languages, if they grow up in the communities that they're patrolling, it leads to better relationships. So we're trying to lift up the best practices in policing and then make sure that there's accountability, that our officers have body cameras so that we can see not only what happened, like we saw in Everett, the body camera has showed clearly what happened to that officer that was killed, and we can hold that perpetrator accountable. It also can ensure that if officers overstep the line, that they can be held accountable too. So I think what we're trying to do is provide support for the best law enforcement we can have, and to recognize that these are tough jobs. And then also that there are some things that we need to provide other resources for. We need more social workers and mental health counselors, because that's not the role of our police officers. And when someone's experiencing addiction or homelessness, what they need is human services and support. And we need to get those supports to them and not ask our law enforcement officers to take on work that isn't in their skill set. So that's the approach I'm trying to take. I know that Representative Ortiz-Self and Representative Peterson have been with us in this, and I'll leave it to them if there's other things we want to focus on.
Okay, next question is from Marked23 on YouTube. What are you doing to support right to repair? It seems like every company has caught on to the idea that they can use technical measures to prevent customers from repairing their own equipment. This has become an environmental problem, as the typical response is to throw it out and buy a new one.
Great. And this is a great question and something we've been struggling with in the legislature really for a number of years. I was vice chair of the Environment Committee before I moved over to Housing, Human Services, and Veterans. And this was a legislation that we worked on back then. And it is hard. We have a number of, as you mentioned, these bigger companies that really put up a fight when it comes to just being able to repair your own phone or some other piece of technology. Oddly, where this movement really started is even a couple of decades back, where some of the big companies that make tractors for farm equipment were keeping this kind of proprietary work within their own realm. So you had to go to the John Deere dealer to fix the tractor. You could no longer do it by yourself. So you think of like a farmer that can't, get some baling wire and fix his tractor. it's a very interesting combination of advocates that have been pushing for this. So from the environmental standpoint, absolutely, you're right. We're too prone to just throw something away if it's not working quite right, or if we get a crack in the glass on our iPhones. So this is something I will continue to work on. I will say that this piece of legislation by Representative Gregerson down in the 33rd came a whisker away from passing the House floor. We thought she had done incredible work working with some of the big tech companies, and it looked like there was a deal there. Again, with these 60-day sessions, we often just run out of time. I think this was one of those cases where it was really a couple of days of a little more back and forth than we probably could have had. And this would have been the most progressive, the most forward-thinking piece of right to repair legislation in the country. So maybe part of the problem in the state of Washington, and I know my colleagues are guilty of this, is sometimes we want the best legislation in the country. And I think that's what we should aim for, because if we can do it, then other states and other countries will look to us and see, oh, well, they got that done, so we can model that. So I think we do need to keep aiming high, keeping that bar really high for environmental issues such as this. So I will work again next year. I will co-sponsor that again, and I will do whatever I can to help pass that. But that's a great question. Thanks for bringing that up.
Okay, our next question is from Allison. I have concerns about the continued conversation around the long-term care tax and required insurance. This is a massive tax that will impact families, specifically low-income families, so hard.
That's a great question. And I don't know that it's a massive tax. It was designed to be a very small payroll tax to pay for this insurance program. But what was crystal clear is with all the uncertainty in the economy and with the pandemic recovery being so uneven, this wasn't the time to ask people to even pay a little bit more. So the legislature this year suspended that program. It also is going to give us time, candidly, to answer a few more questions we've heard from constituents about what happens if I move out of state? What happens if I already have a plan? How will I make sure that gets qualified? What if I'm a military veteran who's getting long-term care services through the VA? So it's going to give us time to address some of the issues that, candidly, we thought about a lot of the issues, but we didn't think of answers to every single one when the bill was passed. So we're going to take some more time to get it right. And then when the economy is in a little bit better position, when families are back on their feet, then it makes sense to invest in, I think the payroll tax was like 0.025%, something very small. Let's wait until the economy is better to ask folks to pay a little bit more to build that nest egg of long-term care that we need as we move forward.
And in the House, one of the things that we heard very strongly from our members is that we want to make sure that anyone who pays into this is getting something out of it. So we have to look at those loopholes for those who aren't going to be able to use it because they're not going to be working for 10 more years. Those who are ready to retire, we don't want them paying even 1 year of it if they're not going to be able to get anything out of it. So we are really looking at those loopholes and making sure that if you pay into it, you're going to get something out of it.
Okay, our next question is from Patrick. The recent reports from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has some big steps laid out if we are to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. What's next for addressing climate change here in Washington? What can we do to support efforts at the state level?
Well, I think I serve on the Senate Environment and Energy Committee, and this is something we're spending a lot of time talking about. And there's a really unique opportunity here for us to, in Washington State, demonstrate leadership to reduce our emissions, but also create good family wage, clean energy jobs for Washingtonians if we get this right. And that's what we're really focused on, is how do we reduce our emissions and show leadership and create new industries. We've got a battery manufacturer in Mukilteo that's creating batteries for utilities. We've got clean energy companies up in Anacortes thinking about how we make the maritime industry lower emissions and more electric. We've got new electric aircraft companies up in Arlington building new electric airplanes. So if we get this right, we can not only improve the quality of life in Washington State, protect our future from climate change, but also put people to work. I will say we've passed really good legislation around making sure that our electricity will be green. We've passed really good legislation to make sure our transportation sector is cleaning up. The biggest area we need to work on next is our homes and our businesses and reducing energy loss. We are wasting a lot of energy in older homes because they weren't built to modern energy codes. What can we do to retrofit them? And how do we make sure that the next set of homes aren't wasting energy as we move into the future? That's the governor proposed a number of really creative ideas. We passed a couple of them this year, but there's some more work to be done there to address how do we make sure that our buildings are as efficient as possible. This is a problem that has taken us hundreds of years to get into, and we've only got about 10 years to really make the big changes to get it right. So we've got to act as quickly and urgently as possible, and then look for those opportunities to put people to work at the same time.
And I would say that really several committees are looking into this because it impacts us in so many areas. Our education committee is looking at how do we have create more apprenticeship programs for those green jobs, so that when and our labor committee is looking at, how do we incentivize people to get trained in those areas so that they when they lose their job, they have another job they can go into, so that we're not taking jobs away, but we are creating more opportunities for our workforce in the future. So we have numerous committees that are looking at a sector of this because this is where we want to continue to move in the future, not even because we want to, but because we have to.
All right. Our next question is from Brian. I'm sorry that 1852 on multi-language prescription drug labels didn't advance. What is the future for that legislation?
That legislation was introduced by my vice chair, Representative Tai, and it was somewhat modeled after the legislation that passed in Oregon as the first state to really look at this multi-language prescription drug label. Of course, we had some opposition from pharmaceutical companies. It wasn't quite the language they wanted. And again, we ran out of time to compromise. When you're introducing things like this, it means bringing stakeholders together. It means a lot of negotiation with the language, et cetera. And on those 60-day sessions, it becomes a little difficult. And I believe that's what happened to this bill. In my conversations with Representative Tai, she intends on bringing that back. So we'll probably see it again in this next session.
And Lillian, I know on the broader issue of language access that you've done more to help with language access in our schools. I know it's not the exact same question, but maybe could you take a minute to talk about what we're doing to make sure that families can access education in language as well?
Absolutely. I co-sponsored a bill that and worked with Representative Orwell, who had worked on a bill. I think we've worked on it for like 3 years, bringing stakeholders together from all areas to really look at just making sure that every parent has access to understanding what is happening in the schools with their children. How do they help them? How do they become the true partners? We know that when parents are partners with our school district and when they understand what's going on, their child does better. And yet there's a huge section of students whose parents do not have access. They don't have a translator to translate special education, IEP notes, individual plan notes. They don't have translation for field trips. They don't understand what's happening. And as a result of that, the child doesn't have equal access. And so she put together with stakeholders a great bill that I was proud to co-sponsor that really helps provide the accurate training. We have trained and criteria for legal translators, for medical translators. We're going to put together education translator criteria so that we can make sure that translations happening for everybody, but also more importantly, accurately being translated. And that's been an area that we've been lacking on. So I'm real excited to see that come to fruition.
Okay. Next question is from Andrea. What are lawmakers doing to help small businesses that are struggling right now?
We have a retired small business owner on the line with us, Representative Peterson. I know you've been working hard both as a small business owner and as a retired small business owner to help support businesses. So, well, why don't we force you to take the lead on this one?
Yeah, once I was a small business owner, once a small business owner, always a small business owner, because you know what your friends and neighbors are going through if they're having a coffee shop or a small manufacturing facility, that it's just a struggle day to day, just to make sure, especially now, making sure that you can find the right employees and making sure that you can do that work just to get things done. So a couple of things that we passed this year, we simplified the B&O tax. And for any small business owner, and for anybody who looks at tax policy in Washington, the business and occupation tax, I have to say, and I'm a legislator, is one of the most bizarre tax systems that we have in the state. And we've done incredible work through the Finance Committee, through the leadership of Representative Noel Frame and many others, to try to simplify our tax code when it comes to business taxes. And so we passed some B&O tax reform that will save literally hundreds of thousands of small businesses here in Washington money. And that's real money. That's dollars that aren't going to go out. So that means that's money coming in. We also added some extra money to help support, as we did kind of in the last year at the beginning of the pandemic, to help our service industry businesses, our arts businesses, our tourism-based businesses, because we know how hard they were hit with the pandemic. Every business was hit hard. Don't get me wrong. I totally understand that. So we have direct money that they can access, some more money to make sure that they're made whole. And then a lot of the other stuff that I think that we've been talking about is the workforce training, making sure that we're creating the educational opportunities that might not be a 4-year degree, but might be a great training opportunity for somebody in light manufacturing or somebody in the healthcare field, so that our small businesses, or childcare, somebody talked about that, talk about a number of small businesses that desperately need help. We have been trying to help them create and help the state create those job opportunities and job training opportunities. So there are a lot of small things, but as a small business owner, that's what it is. It's a lot of small things. It's not one thing that's going to make you or break you, year after year. It's putting all the pieces together, and that's what we've been trying to do. And again, I'm just incredibly impressed with the work that has been done on the tax policy side of things to really try to make our tax policy more fair to our small businesses, more fair to working people, and making sure that the big corporations that are hugely successful, that are raking in literally billions of dollars, are starting to pay their fair share when it comes to fixing our system. And that's going to go in the mid to long term. That, I think, is going to really go a long way to support our smaller businesses.
Okay, well, it's almost 7, so we're going to be wrapping this up in a few minutes. But before we go, we want to remind everyone that on election years, to prevent the use of state resources for election purposes, legislators who are up for re-election must comply with certain rules, including not sending out newsletters from May 16 until after the November election results are certified. But do contact their offices with your questions and concerns, because they can and will respond to you directly. And I'm sure they can talk a bit more about this. Representative Peterson, want to get us started with closing remarks?
I do, and thank you and that wasn't even a setup for this story I'm about to tell, but your ideas are hugely important. So please contact our offices anytime. Doesn't matter what time of year, elections, non-elections, during session, because that's often where we get the best ideas or great ideas for legislation. And this happened to me this year. I had coffee with my friend Doug at Walnut Street Coffee in downtown Edmonds just before session started. And he was like, boy, this is way too late to ask you about this piece of legislation. But right now, county auditors have to charge money to indigent people if they want to change their names. I don't really like the term indigent, but basically, if you're really, really poor and you need to change your name, say you're fleeing a domestic abuse situation, or you're a trans individual and you want to change your name to the name that you feel that you should have, If you were poor, you still had to pay $200 or $300 to get that done. Courts could waive the fees, but county auditors couldn't. We didn't think this was fair. Doug was like, this is not fair. We should change this. We wrote some legislation. We introduced it. It passed. The governor signed it. And Doug's like, wow, how did that happen? I said, well, that doesn't happen very often where we get it done in a year, but it does happen very often where constituents come to us with a real problem that they see, and we can try to figure out a way to fix it. So please keep those ideas coming. And again, when we're in session next year in person, if you get the chance, please come down to Olympia. It is one of the most beautiful Capitol buildings in the world. It's inspiring. We love to see our constituents come down and sit down in our offices and just connect with us on a one-to-one basis. And if you can't make it down to Olympia during the interim, contact our office. And again, if you have an idea, I'm happy to meet you for a cup of coffee anywhere in the district, and we can see if we can make some changes that really affect people's lives. So thank you again, everybody, for being here. And again, thank you to my incredible seatmates. I am one of the, if not the most fortunate legislator, certainly one of them to have two seatmates that I can trust, that I believe in, and that I sincerely consider dear, dear friends. So thank you, Marco and Lillian.
Thank you, Strom. And let me just echo my thanks as well for everyone being here. And I want to thank everyone who has taken the time to write to us, to share their ideas, to testify, to send words of encouragement, to hold us accountable, to send, give us feedback about something that works or doesn't work in their lives. Because it's not just an idea of something positive, that you want to see happen. It could also be, this is how this will affect me. And we need to know that. It is your story that impacts the legislation that we do. And so please keep that coming. It's very important to us. And thank you for hanging in there with us through a very tumultuous and fast session. And we look forward to continuing to meet with you. And like Lilia said, our moderator said, even though we cannot be sending out newsletters, etc., we still, and we're a part-time legislature, we still work 12 months out of the year. We are still your legislator all the way through the year, regardless, and we want to hear from you. And this is the time when we do our interim work. This is the time when we meet with stakeholders and we formulate what our priorities are going to be and what we're going to really champion this next year. So your voice matters, and it matters to us, and it counts, and it matters to us. So thank you very much. Senator Lias.
Thank you. It's so wonderful to be with all of you and to have this opportunity to talk about the work we did and the work that lies ahead. I will just say the deadline for these election year restrictions is in May. So you're going to get a newsletter from us just before the deadline. We want to make sure you hear we're putting the finishing touches on it. We're going to throw it in the mail here in the next couple of weeks. So look forward to that. And, we encourage folks to hang on to the last newsletter because it has our contact information. And sometimes it helps to just have that in the junk drawer or on the refrigerator in case something comes up you want to talk to us about. Now, a lot of stuff came up on this call, but a couple of topics didn't. And I know that they're really important to people in the 21st. So I want to make sure we talk about them. Strom raised the issue of trans Washingtonians, and we are seeing states across the country attack LGBTQ youth. Florida, the most recent example, but other states across the nation. In our Washington, that ain't going to fly. We are doing everything we can to protect and support and love our LGBTQ neighbors, particularly our trans youth, to make sure they're safe in our schools, that they get the health care they need, and that this is a safe and welcoming state. So when you read those heinous headlines about what's happening in other states, know that as long as Strom and Lillian and I are at the Capitol on your behalf, we will make sure that does not happen in our Washington. The other issue that's on the front pages is women's access to health care, particularly access to reproductive care and abortion services. And I'm proud to say in our Washington, we expanded access to reproductive health care and abortion this session to make sure that no person in Washington who needs an abortion can't get access to it. We need to make sure at our very fundamental level, we protect the rights of everyone to make these most sacred decisions for themselves with their medical provider. And you can read all the stories about all the awful things happening in other states, even in our neighboring state of Idaho. That's not going to happen in Washington state. We are going to make sure that women and people who need abortion have access to it when they need it in affordable and safe ways, so that nobody is forced to make a choice that isn't the right one for them. But on a happier note, it's a delight to represent you in the legislature. We look forward to hearing your great ideas. I just want to give a shout out to Grace, a constituent who wanted to donate platelets, and she couldn't because of her age. And she brought that idea to me, and we passed Grace's law to make sure that 16 and 17-year-olds who have their parents' permission can donate platelets in Washington. Another great example, just like Doug's idea and just like so many others we get. Keep bringing us good ideas. We'll get them passed into law. Look forward to our newsletter in your post boxes soon. And in the meantime, we look forward to hearing from you and stay in touch.
All right. Well, hey, that is a wrap. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. Remember to contact your legislators when you just think about them this summer. They do love to hear from you. Take care and good evening.